what I'm thinking about Uniswap as a primitive, or AMEMS as a primitive, but let's say, is because usually it is when you get something like that as a program primitive that ends up exploding into into a whole category, or ends up potentiating a new
Yeah.
category because people just swoop in and start building on top of it. I'm
Yeah.
quite curious on what it is going to be for the high speed side of things.
Welcome back to the
Been
greatest
a while.
podcast. Yeah, the greatest podcast in the known universe. I wonder, what is the unknown universe?
Probably there's podcasting on areas of non-observable black matter areas, things like that.
But
Maybe
is that what the known universe refers to as the like non-black matter stuff? Or does it just relate to distance?
quite frankly, I think that the expression originally comes from the Here Be Dragons period. So I think we have been overloading it for a while.
Okay. So right. So this is like back in the days when people looked up at stars and they're like, I wonder what's up there.
Exactly. So many lamps.
Yeah. But yeah, and so we have some stuff to talk about related to crypto. There's quite a lot going on, though I feel like nothing like there in the last few weeks, because we haven't recorded for a few weeks. There hasn't been any like single thing that has been like really exciting, but there have been a lot of smaller things.
And there are a lot of like little signs pointing to a change in the market, in the market situation as well, right? Not by and large, not saying that like, oh, it's bull market ahoy, but clearly there's enough activity going on for people to be able to rock pull a whole bunch of money and on ether out of meme tokens, right? So that's definitely a sign.
There are early signs of people getting ready to be rich again.
Yes, and throwing money at very stupid things like they do. But there
Yeah.
are also a lot of late cycle sign things like, ocean coming up again, for instance.
Ocean Protocol.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Wow.
Because AI.
Right. Of course. Of course. Yeah. Everyone's doing AI partnerships now because that totally makes sense. But I do want to, before we get into the crypto side of things, I do want to talk a little bit about AI Doomers because this is something that's been driving me. It's been driving me insane recently. I've listened to a lot of podcasts from people on both sides of the topic and whatever. And I cannot like come to the worldview that they have without assuming either stupidity or some kind of deception. And here's why. So like we have these like LLMs right now, which are quite powerful. They're very helpful. Like I use ChatGPT a lot, especially when I'm trying to dig into like a new topic. It's very helpful. But then you have this sort of AI doomer conversation where they're assuming like some obvious path from LLMs to AGI. Yet none of them, literally no person on the planet has any idea what that path looks like. Like LLMs, it's a fucking program. Like you give it an input, it gives you an output. Like you can argue that all like sort of this sort of predicting the next token forces an LLM to basically simulate entire world or a worldview, all this other bullshit. That's fine. But it is still just a program. There is no agency whatsoever. And there's no clue where agency would suddenly arise from. So this is something that like really drives me nuts because there's like this very arrogant way of thinking that is very prevalent right now, which is that like someone, Eliza Yudkowsky, someone like we already know the path. And they definitely do not. So the conversation they're having about AI taking over the world and destroying everyone, blah, 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 is completely nonsensical to have when we have no idea what the distance to that is, right? And we know for sure that whatever that distance is, we're not even on that curve yet. The current AI that's not on the curve. It's not on the curve to agency. Is my point.
Okay.
And then finally, and then I'll let you react. The reason this drives me so insane is because we do have a very well understood risk with the current sort of like generation and architecture of AI. And that risk is that a very small number of companies will control it, right? The same thing that happened with social media, probably worse. And these AI doomers who are speculating about a risk that no one understands or can in any way predict the path to, they're basically assuming they understand sentience, which is absurd. They are pushing for a world where this very near-term understandable risk is much more likely. So what we do not want to do specifically in the short term is create a bunch of regulation that forces this technology into the hands of a very small set of companies. And this is something that Mark Andreessen is arguing with like his bootleggers and priests and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's much less, like it doesn't need a whole significant intellectual argument. The only thing you need is to look at the two risks, put one in the bucket of no idea how this happens, and the other one in this is very clear how this happens, and then deal with the one that is very clear how this happens and is happening. And like there's the less wrong community, there's like this whole movement around AI doomerism, and like none of these people have a fucking clue what they're talking about because no one does. It makes no sense. They are creating a worse world and then positioning it as like this humanitarian effort. Fucking insane. Anyway.
I'm not entirely sure you expect me to say this. I mean, I could take the devil's advocate position.
Please do. I have not heard a single like real argument. Basically, the argument, as far as I can tell, is like we're on a curve, on some curve, the scaling up LLMs curve, let's call it that. And we can extrapolate that like given the amount of money and resources and like stuff, that is going to continue getting better and like blah, blah, blah. Sure. How this leads to the demise of humanity is completely beyond me. How you make the leap from better chat GPT to like AI with agency or sentience and starts doing all kinds of crazy things. Like,
okay, so
unless you assume that only large governments and very few companies have control over that, which then, yes, I understand that creates a very bad world.
perfect. Like, for what it's worth, I'm not an AI doomer at all. And if I were, I'm kind of on the position, whenever people start freaking out about some new development like this, my general position is like, look, we are likely to figure out. And if we don't figure it out, then we had a good run. It's our own fault. We basically have Darwined ourselves out of existence. We had it coming. So that's kind of like my general position on this sort of situation. It's almost a case of being pessimistic than pleasantly surprised. Now, I could say that is just one of, if I were going to be, if I were going to play the devil's advocate, I would say that that's only one of the various AI doomer things that are around, right? One of them is people in power are going to start relying more and more on these systems that they don't actually understand in order to make decisions. So it's not necessarily about, is this thing going to gain agency, but are people going to start shutting off their brains more and more? Arguably, that's not a problem with AI. That's a problem with people being idiots, right?
Yeah.
And us getting elderly idiots in positions of power. Sure.
It's the same with media, Google, whatever. Right now, there's no difference.
Certainly. No, I think that the thing that you're
and let me if I may just like tack onto these so that I don't forget them. People in power relying on AI more to make decisions in a world where there is one company or a very small amount of companies that are in control of that is worse, because those companies then end up deciding what people in power think. Versus
I absolutely,
if it's all
I
open
absolutely agree.
source and there's a large diversity of options, you're much less likely to have a situation where like any individual person in power is somehow like overtly influenced by an individual company's opinions.
Yeah, I agree. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here, and frankly, I'm not going to be able to sustain the devil's advocate position for too long. Well, actually, let me quibble with
You-
another thing you said, which was
Your
sentient.
first devil's advocate argument was an argument for my position ultimately.
Let me quibble with something that you said, which was sentience, which arguably something with a certain amount of agency doesn't need to be sentient in order to do a lot of potential damage. So
No,
it's not necessarily that we need to be on a curve to in a curve to general artificial intelligence by the next 18 months or whatever it is. It is just that at the current rate of progress might be freaking them in the fuck out. Right.
no, but so I said sentience kind of provocatively, but like you don't need sentience. That is entirely. You don't need qualia. You don't need anything like that. You need something with agency, right? Like that. But agency is
Or you need somebody wiring this thing the
maybe
right
the
way.
same as sentience, may not be.
So basically, I think that the thing that I think part of the thing that they're worrying about, by the way, is basically the AI slash open source equivalent of. You remember this story of there was this kid, like I think 20 years ago, who started taking, I think it was smoke detectors from everywhere, and then started scraping some of the material and made his own tiny nuclear reactor at home. I think that they're basically worried about the AI version of that. Um,
How is that
quite,
different from Google? This shit is scraped from the internet.
I know. Again, quite frankly, I think that a lot of this is coming mostly from the fact that being a doomer gets you a lot of views and interviews, placement.
Publicity. Yeah.
Exactly. And the second is that, first of all, if you're right and the whole world goes to hell, where you say like, see, I told you so. And then if you're wrong and the world doesn't go to hell, then you get to claim like, see, it was through my good efforts that we avoided this. It's kind of like the equivalent of we need to keep sacrificing people because otherwise the sun is not going to come up. So, what do you want to risk the sun not coming up? You need to pour some hearts out. I'm not on that side at all. I would very much rather if this thing is more widely spread than, just OpenAI and Microsoft and someone else.
The reason that is a nonsensical argument, the whole like, but it might like the reason the position of so not an argument, but the reason it is nonsensical to position yourself like that, where you're like saying it's going to kill us all, and then if it doesn't, like it's because you worked so hard. It is because the very near term issues we have are quite possibly only solvable with good enough AI. And good enough
No,
AI
Temu,
distributed to the
Temu,
wide
you don't understand.
population.
You're not
So
looking at the
this
same
is
incentives. You want an ideal
no,
goal. There's people likely want self promotion.
no, I understand there's micro level incentives and whatever. Like being a doomer right now does get you on a lot of podcasts. I get that. But the world they are creating for them and their children, by the way, how many doomers have children? I don't know, is much worse. Much worse. Like within a very short period of time, if it was distributed widely and people had open access to this, many issues in the world could be solved potentially. There's a reasonable path to assuming that it will be possible, right? Like there are
That's a little
already
bit optimistic.
examples,
I would say that
already
inarguably more
examples of
tools
protein
out there are
folding,
better than
etc.
less fewer tools, is what I would say.
Yeah, like, but let's look at like education is the easiest example, right? Like widely spread, like providing an accurate view of the world. AI is potentially the greatest educational tool of all time, and it can be very, very democratized. Maybe not democratized to everyone on the planet because nothing ever really gets there immediately, but like pretty damn close. And so you are arguing that because maybe some like future algorithm that we come up with that mysteriously gets agency. I'm even willing to buy the argument that agency like is some sort of like emergent property with enough complexity and the right algorithms. Like maybe, but like that future construction that we may at some point create, maybe not, no one has any fucking idea, was going to take over the world. Use that as an argument to prevent people from getting like a proper education today, right? Because what like regulation and banning open source and whatever will create is an education as OpenAI wants to educate, or that Google wants to educate people. It's not a proper education, and it's not real world. Like this, the whole concept is this. George Hotz has this good debate with a guy. I think his name is Connor Leahy, like a left wrong guy, if I understood correctly. And he keeps talking about alignment, and George Hotz is like, "What is alignment? Like with whom? And like what does that even mean?" And I agree with that. Like this, there's only alignment with me that like is possible, right? And that will not be possible if it's not available. Like, the source code, parameters, everything to everyone.
So sorry if I'm smiling too much, but I find this adorable. Basically, it kind of sounds like you're going about general AI, about the AI Doomers on kind of like the same rants that used to go about against like the Clipper chip and then the system factors into every encryption thing, where you're making reasonable arguments, but these people don't really care about reasonable arguments.
I know, but it's so like maybe to try to wrap this up, like I think like the doomers general approach to how this should be handled is the only way in which we have a bad outcome. Like, and I can't be sure of that, but like it is much
I
more
am
likely.
okay. I'm not gonna say that it is the only way. I'm gonna say that reducing the availability of these tools to people, limiting it to only a few large companies or individuals, or, whomever gets a stamp of approval, it is almost certain to have a bad outcome. Whereas I am
Yes.
not sure what odds I would even assign to the other case.
Well, the odds that you can assign to the other case is basically like it, like the concern with open sourcing it is basically like, oh, it's like someone will just like magically like create this AGI, and then like terrorists will immediately get their hands on it. And like when you think about that scenario for even a second, if it's open and everyone has access to it, then we have this like large amount of AGIs growing up in parallel, which basically means we have something like the society we have today, like this different alignments, different fucking ideas, and there's no one is like considerably more powerful than the other, right? There's a way
Okay,
more.
interesting. Let's explore that a little bit because it almost sounds like you're making the AA version of the good guy with a gun argument. As in, if everybody has guns, then there's going to be a good guy with a gun that stops the bad guy with a gun. If everybody has AIs,
Mhm.
then so is that the argument, the AI equivalent that you're making?
I mean, pretty much, yeah. So I'm saying like every technology has this aspect, right? Like the good guys can have it, the bad guys can have it. You have hackers, you have like, virus, like you have attack and defense. But if you have no defense as a person or as a society, and there's only one or two organizations, then the risk of that attack is just very, very high. You have no defense. And these people are comparing fucking AI, like LLMs to nukes, which is, I don't even like, I can't get into that mindset, but like, let's take that comparison on face value and like why are nukes not a problem? Because everyone fucking has them.
Not really. Nukes are not a problem because everybody has them, and while as long as they are in the hands of people who see mutually assured destruction as a bad thing, that is why they're not a problem. At the moment that you get nukes in the hands of people who don't really care about that, then they stop. You stop having this deterrent, arguably, right? In it is. I mean,
I like
mutually assured destruction only works as a deterrent when you have people who have an interest on remaining on keeping their societies functional to a point, right? If you get, I don't know, some psycho with like Nicolaic codes, then who knows?
sure, sure, but like here again, we can take an example of like, let's assume that we have a vastly better LLM and some psycho gets their hands on it. How will that help that psycho destroy the world?
Oh, I don't think it's the LLM that is the concern. I've
It's the
again at
hypothetical
the
future
sure at the
algorithm.
cycle. When we're talking about the cycle, we're talking about next gen weaponizable kind of thing that I don't know is going to do magic and help them do something, right? I think that's
And
the
and who is gonna have that next gen by default?
sure. Now the,
People viewed as psychos from the perspective of many countries in the world.
sure. Look, are you? I hardly think that you're going to expecting a counter argument from me about
No, no, no,
if one
no.
should trust
I
governments. But no, but you
no,
know
no, no,
what's
no.
what might be a better analogy of their concerns. I'm paraphrasing here. And again, I think that they're basically doing this thing mostly out of self promotion, not because it's an actual likely reality. But a better analogy of their concerns might be something like on the path that we're on with 3D printing and with reduction of costs, it is perfectly possible that in 10 years, everybody could have a virus splicer at their home. Now, most people are going to use it innocently.
But is that AI?
Doesn't matter. I'm just an analogy. Most
Yeah,
people are
no,
going
no,
to,
I know that's an issue, right?
yeah, most people are going to use it innocently. And arguably, it only takes one person who uses it for evil because all those other people are not going to be able to come up with a counter virus or a counter agent on time.
Unless they have AGI, maybe. Right? Like my point here is that quite potentially humanity is fucked on pretty much every front unless we get AGI into the hands of everyone very quickly.
Yeah, I don't even think
Like
AGI. I
what's
just
our
think like
route out like right
I,
now?
frankly, I just think that better systems that help remove some of the drudgery of things, basically stuff that gets you better answers. Which again, we're not there yet. Like even Llama 2 is still spitting out nonsense when you ask him. And by the way, if anybody is listening to this and they're thinking about evaluating and starting using like LLM of any sort, first ask them a whole bunch of questions about a domain that you really know a lot about, because this is going to help you
Yeah.
calibrate what sort of
Yeah.
hit miss ratio you can expect. So anyway, even if Llama 2, which seems to be one of the better performing ones now, if it's still spitting out nonsense, we're clearly not in a situation where this is where people can use this in a way that they could almost trust it blindly. But I do think it is going to be better at the point that people can. And the main way to get it to that is, I think, incremental improvement and working ownership, not just hoping, I don't know, elderly senator who had a stroke to be able to legislate this.
Mm. The last point about this that I would make, which I find hilariously ironic, is that I think AI Doomers have done more to spread the word about AI than any other group on planet Earth, including the companies who are building it themselves.
Well, that's just the Streisand effect, isn't it?
But it is funny. Like if anyone I hadn't heard that you can do this sort of shit. They have now. Like, yeah, game theory out the window. Anyway, we'll see what happens, but I am very intent on getting a local large language, like I mean large, like 300 billion parameter model running on a box in my home. The inference is doable on something I can buy. So that's what I want. And I will use that in whatever way I want. And I think that's what everyone should be looking for. I do not want to hand over basically some like virtual avatar of myself to a company in the US, which was already hacked for their credit card details like a year ago.
Yeah, actually,
But
might be one of those.
also, I announced incognito mode, which it's wonderful.
Great.
Thanks, guys. Like we all know how well Google's incognito mode like protects you from Google itself. So fucking ridiculous.
No, I will say one thing, by the way, about when we might get AGI kind of thing. If you had asked me, and it's easy to it's easy to mock these results, this nonsensical results. But if you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't have told you that we weren't even close to getting these kinds of results. So to me, all bets are off on when we're gonna be in 5 years.
Well, that's the problem because like something works to some degree, and now everyone extrapolates that to infinity immediately, which is not how the world works.
That's
It's just not.
That's what I'm saying. All bets are off. Like, who the hell knows? Like, we might be stuck at this local optima for the next 25 years. We might get some massive progress. No idea.
And if no one knows, we shouldn't take steps that very clearly cause a bad world. That's,
I hope you're not expecting me to disagree here.
no. Moving on to crypto, where everyone now is broadcasting how they're working with AI companies on God knows what. What do we want to talk about? There was a few scares. There was the curve exploit, and then the founder has like put, what was it, 40% of the supply and like lending, and was barely able to make payments on that, and then just in time and to like save the day and bought a bunch of the tokens OTC. That was fun, though. It's beyond me what the rationale is for putting that amount of tokens into the lending.
You mean for the loan, or what part are you going to get?
Yeah, like why would you use for it whatever it was 30-40% of circulating curve supply to back the loan? I mean,
maybe you don't care if that amount is liquidated, for instance, which is a perfectly reasonable explanation, right? And you couldn't possibly just This was actually a really interesting setup. If we're talking about people's incentives, let's say, right? So Megodov wants to buy a massive mansion, right?
Which he did.
But if he has two paths here. One is that he can dump them on the market, or he can ask for a loan.
And he would probably get, if he dumped that amount, he would get that much out that he got for a loan, even though it's over collateralized, maybe less.
He probably would have gotten less, but also he would have been an asshole to the community because he's dumping the price, right? Now, the way that this actually played out, he got to sell a whole bunch of this thing OTC anyway, but he's not seeing as an asshole for dumping on people. He is saving the product or keeping afloat while reducing his own stake, right? So he gets the same net result of actually getting the cash out while being seen as somebody who's doing it
But if someone didn't come to save him, things
Oh,
would have gone
sure.
tricky.
Then the market.
However, of course, there were many people with a high incentive to keep Curve afloat. So it's a
Yeah.
pretty easy target market to sell to.
And then he turned around and asked for a 5 million loan on Cream. I think it was fine. So it's just after, just after being bailed out. Yeah, man. I mean, look, if nothing else,
Crypto.
I think this was the good thing to take out of it, for what it's worth, is that I think this was a great example that the system works. You would have gotten liquidated, right? Zero argument. You had to find
Yeah.
a willing buyer for those tokens. So
Yeah. Yeah. It would have gone liquidated. That's true.
yeah, man.
Though, had he gone liquidated, it could be that Aave would have gotten less out of it than
Yeah,
the
man.
collateral was meant to be worth
Sure.
within the loan, right? This is an issue, but this is a collateralization rate, that sort of question.
Sure. And that is an issue with the system itself. And that is an issue that people need to figure out before. Okay. No, actually, I was going to say this is something that people need to figure out before actually providing liquidity on places like Aave as well. Most people are not going to do any research, but hey, that's their own fault. That to me is still the system working. If you don't do any research and you get burned, then that's your own fault. But yeah, this would have been a case of the system working as intended.
Well, it was an interesting thing. I went to the office and somebody told me about this, and I was like, they were all panicked about how crypto is going to die, and I was like, oh, that sounds like your average day, honestly.
Yeah. It's hey, no, it's Curve. Sure, it's a big protocol. It's got to get hit. It's a governance token. Who gives a shit?
Yeah, and then ultimately, if it did get hit, there would just be someone else who spins up a curve, and then there we go. PayPal is doing USD stable on Ethereum.
Yeah, I mean, explain to me what you think the rationale is for doing that, because PayPal is like, I get doing a stablecoin if you want to become a bank. PayPal pretty much already is a bank. So I'm curious about what PayPal gets out of this other than dipping their toe on the Web3 side of things.
Well, right now they're still dealing like they don't have their own currency, right? Like, and there's only one way in the world right now, which is like a viable regulatory path to being a central bank, and it's doing a crypto stablecoin. Weirdly, it's not. It doesn't make sense, but that is just how it is.
But what I'm saying is that PayPal is already acting as a bank in the sense that it gets deposit from people. It moves numbers around in a ledger for who knows how long before actually sending money out.
Operationally,
Yep.
yeah. No, I
So
agree. It's just the issue inside of that, right? Like, can PayPal and its current model invest the underlying asset? I suspect.
okay, so that is the thing. You're saying that under this model, they might be able to invest the assets that they get for
They
the
have.
stablecoin. They don't necessarily get to invest the assets that they're holding for the transfers.
I don't know like all their regulatory requirements, and they're global, so they are very messy, I'm sure. But broadly speaking, in most cases, that would be considered a money transmitter. And a money transmitter needs to basically hold client assets in segregated bank accounts, and they can't touch them. While if you can get the licensing to launch your own stablecoin, you can invest the underlying assets.
Yeah, and you may have
And that,
different holding requirements as well. And yeah, that makes sense.
and that 2-3% interest rate in PayPal scale, like it kind of doesn't matter where PayPal issues this thing. Like what I found weird about this model is that they did it with Paxos, because I think Paxos can only do Ethereum from a like regulatory standpoint. That's what they've said in some past things related to the Binance thing.
Mhm.
And so maybe that's why, but like from PayPal's perspective, it makes sense to try to convert basically all of their customer assets into uh, this stable coin, regardless of whether it's on a blockchain or not, by the way. Like, uh, they could just have this on their internal ledger, but there's probably various regulatory reasons why they want to position it as a stable coin, as opposed to like, we're just going to create our own money here. And that gives them 2 to 3% on that entire stack, right? And so
No,
on.
that makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Now, did you see this all these dumb comments of people getting up in arms about like, oh, don't use this thing. It has
Freeze.
like freeze authority. Like, name a regulated stablecoin that doesn't have one. It was like, oh my God. Like, sure, it's PayPal. You may not want to trust PayPal anyway because they seem to be generally assholes about giving people their money. But, this is hardly a PayPal issue. They're like, this is not died. It's like, no shit. You don't say. So that was going to be died. Well, and even if it were die, basically means that you have freeze authority over 40% of that or 50, whatever the current amount of USDC underneath is. It's anyway, those reactions, again, I'm not sure if they were, I'm not sure if, again, it was people being negative because negative things gets clicks. I'm not sure if they're just ignorant about the implementation of other stable coins.
Well, the interesting thing about it was that the Ethereum implementation was made with some like really, really old version of Solidity, which people were finding quite funny. But I think it makes perfect sense, and I think it's good, right? Like, one thing that this brings to mind is that I think Spook was just too early, and PayPal might be timing it exactly right. Whatever big company does this first, big deal,
Yeah.
big deal.
We shall see how it works out.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about the SEC.
Yeah.
They're always doing stuff. The only thing that was positive recently was they went after HEXed and Pulse Chain. That made me very happy.
I, that was kind of one of those broken clock things. Like, oh, finally, you're actually going out after what seems to be an obvious scam. Like, how did you happen to stumble into that one? Hmm. You know, at the very least, it might be a good way to get the proper contrast between the things that should be going on in crypto and the things that shouldn't when people actually dig up and end up reading about the details of stuff like Hex. Because I'm not sure how many people who are not deep into the crypto space are aware about that particular scam. It has always struck me as such a weird thing that people keep throwing money at this guy who's like spending it on fast cars. It seems to be almost like a simping thing. It's so strange.
Yeah. I think that's kind of exactly what it is. He's very clever. So I know this dude. He lives in Helsinki, or at least used to. I think there's an extradition treaty from Finland to the US, so we'll see what happens. I haven't
Yeah.
heard anything. But yeah, he's very, very good at marketing. And I've met some people who are like really into hacks and pulse chain. All of them, like, they do not have any technical or reasonable reason as to why. It's kind of like, it's not that dissimilar to like Cardano believers, but this is maybe more severe, where they just think that this guy is Messiah and will lead them to the promised land, and they're willing to buy it. And it's very easy to, if you reach enough people, you will find people who are just like willing to believe they're going to get very rich without doing anything. Like, this guy he used to, well, at least the internet says this, he used to be known on the internet, I think back in like early 2000s or something, as the spam king. Like, he's done that kind of stuff.
So he
wherein,
kind of knows what works with a brain dead audience, basically.
yeah, and he knows the strategies with which to reach them.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. And after a while, it becomes for people an issue of like I could not have made a mistake here by sending this guy thousands of dollars. Therefore, I need to write this thing, right? Because clearly, I'm not stupid enough to send somebody like I know you scammer money, so he must not be an obvious scammer. So yeah,
Um, yeah, but it's a good thing that they went after that. It's just like, so to recap, you've gone after Ripple, Coinbase, Binance, and Hex. Like, isn't that kind of a weird group? Like,
well, not necessarily. They're going after high profile things. If
sure.
you want to,
One thing about Hex, which is I think really interesting, is that the Hex market cap is very high, or used to be at least. I don't know what it is now. But something you will notice is that it's never been on the front page of CoinMarketCap. Not once. Not even when it was multiples higher than things on the first page.
I can't say I track Hex that closely. Most,
I only noticed this because once I was just like, I wonder what's on page 2 of CoinMarketCap. And I went there, and lo and behold, Hex with a much higher market cap than the last 60 on the first page. And I was like, why is it here? And I don't know. Just people don't want
interesting.
it to be on the first page.
Now the Hex stuff, and I'm not nearly as active on Twitter. I'm actually mostly not on Twitter lately on my main account at the very least. I'm not participating from the out from where I try to read some stuff. But most of the Hex stuff that I used to learn was through Eric Wall, who keeps taking huge dumps on it from a considerable height.
Yeah.
But after a while, it was again my brain was just like, but why do people keep following this guy? And then I just kind of like stopped listening at all. So
Yeah. To be fair, I listened to some debate with Eric Wall and Richard Hart, or Richard Schuler, as is his real name. I don't think Eric made the best arguments either, though. Like, part of the brilliance of Richard Hart is that, like, some of his arguments actually do make sense. Like, I can't remember specifics, but like arguments on like how decentralized is Ethereum really, and like how good is the code, and like all this sort of stuff. He does make
it's
valid points. He's been around for a long time. He was around since the early Bitcoin days. Um, so like he like mixes that in, and unfortunately, Eric didn't have like the kind of firepower needed. Like Eric was making a big point about like why doesn't he visit the US? And he was just like, I don't want to go. And you know, like, can you not go? And like that's not. I mean, maybe for the audience that he's trying to reach, those are the kinds of arguments he needs to be making. I don't know, but to me, that's not super convincing because you're not arguing the merits of Pulse Chain and Hex. You're arguing like, is this guy weird or not, or is he a criminal or not? And like,
he's having sketchy.
yeah, but like that's sort of like not that useful unless you can definitively
Yeah,
prove it, because then it just comes across a little bit like you're just trying to like make him look bad as opposed
yeah.
to actually taking him down. But anyway, like it was a pretty funny debate. It's worth watching just for the sheer
I don't think I
madness.
want that in my brain. I mostly used to just read. I mostly used to read well stuff about this stupid hard slow kind of thing. Like if I just deposit on one side, the other side fills up magically. Like what? No, on a liquidity pool. So that's kind of stuff is what I used to read. Yeah, not gonna. I think this. I wasn't expecting to even be talking about Hex today, and I think we have spent way more brain cycles on
Yeah.
it than we should.
What do you want to talk about? NFT bros on Solana?
No, not no, in fact. I mean, this is just something that I'm glad is finally dying. because there was a whole lot of NFT brewing for a while, insisting that Solana was going to be an NFT chain, which I think we have discussed. And Alison Hubble posted a great thread dissecting that. Um, Basically, I never understood the narrative of Solana as an NFT chain because it is NFTs are low velocity assets and they're the worst possible fucking showcase for something that is high velocity and perfect with low fees. I understand and I actually recommended Solana to a couple of NFT artists because it is a good place to experiment, right? Because it's cheap. It just the idea of Solana becoming like NFTs becoming Solana's whole thing was
No,
so that
but
dumb. I'm glad that thing is dying finally.
having said, or like as a counterpoint to it's a bad showcase for Solana. In some ways, yes, but then again, compressed NFTs, which is what they have now, where you can launch like 1 million NFTs and pay like a few dollars, is really compelling. It's not just for NFT like PFP use cases, but for anything where you need to distribute a large amount of NFTs regularly. Like Lens protocol launched on Polygon and is sort of like slowly moving away from Polygon for obvious reasons we don't need to get into.
For
Um,
Polygon reasons.
for well, basically just scalability reasons, right? Like Polygon is popular and then thus clogged up and expensive. They had this slightly bonkers idea of making every follow an NFT, which I never understood in a practical sense. But things like that would be more reasonable on Solana. If like it just doesn't cost anything, then you might as well.
Let me amend my what is it? It's not that NFTs are a bad showcase because that was the wrong expression. Is that NFTs would be a terrible specialization, which is that if you're saying this is the NFT chain, that's what you're specialized on, right? And as Mario said, I think he said like, no, so that should be like the everything chain. You want NFTs, you have NFTs. You want high speed DeFi, have high speed DeFi. Knock yourself
Yeah.
out, right? The fact that it is fast and it is cheap actually allows all these things. You shouldn't become the X chain. Right?
Yeah. That's true. That's true. And to maybe like looking at the future, I think we're bound to start getting use cases which have never been possible before quite soon. Like we're kind of at this weird stage as an industry where we now have not one but a couple high performance chains. We have a bunch of roll-ups which are semi high performance. But like we're we're gonna get to like a total sort of chain capacity and cost that is considerable. And we kind of already are there. Like it's continuously improving, but we already live in that world where you can do things and pay almost nothing to do them and do them quickly. And we haven't yet, it's probably partly because it's been the bear market or maybe people are working on them right now, but we haven't yet really seen use cases come out which like could only work in that situation. Like Lens protocol is kind of along those lines. But then they decided to go to Polygon. Um, and so like you have things like that, but there's bound to be a lot more. Like the whole you can start using Solana as a database, um, and that opens up opportunities which just were not possible
Um,
before.
I can mention two right now, Mango and Elusive. You would not
Sure.
get Mango markets on anything on a layer one on anything other
Yeah,
than
yeah,
fast
yeah.
machine. And Elusive, man, it's beautiful.
I know, I know. So, but my point here is more that like those are not like new. They're new ways of doing DeFi and privacy basically. And I mean like new categories, which
Uh,
but elusive is very nice. Like it's I don't know. They have swaps coming now, private swaps. So that should be interesting. Haven't looked into how that works, but shouldn't be too difficult.
Yeah. So you basically mean
Yeah.
something like we might get, in a way that Bank or Uniswap were new things at the time, we might get something like that. Basically, a new type of a new type of primitive up to a point that is only possible in these things.
Yeah. So maybe to break it down, so we kind of have like two like very low level primitives on the application side, fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens. I'm not sure if we need more, maybe, I don't know, but I'm not really talking about that level per se, but more the like we have like DeFi, and then we have the NFT market, and we have whatever social media. Like these all use those primitives in different ways, but I think we may find soon that there's a new category on that level that has become possible that we haven't quite figured out yet. Maybe it's an existing category, but that has like a breakthrough moment because it's possible. Like gaming as an example, I don't think it
Hmm.
necessarily will be gaming. I think gaming is more like a pretty linear progression as we have games which are popular even on expensive slow chains, but you have this sort of like as it gets cheaper and faster, you can do more interesting things, and so you have this slow progression. But there might be an entirely new category like that. Like what I still so like in the early days of the internet, like the most like there is a large number of categories on the internet now, and almost none of them were obvious from that point in time. And every now and then you would have this phase where it'd be like, okay, we figured out all the categories, and then something else would emerge. And so I think that will sort of continue to happen as we bring the cost down. But then it's hard to predict like what those cost and speed levels are where like completely new things unlock. And usually what will happen is you'll get to the cost and speed where some new things are possible, but it'll take time for people to figure it out. And then you get them eventually.
No, I hear you. What I'm thinking about Uniswap as a primitive, or AMMs as a primitive, well, let's say, is because usually it is when you get something like that as a as a program primitive that ends up exploding into a whole category, or ends up potentiating a new
Yeah.
category because people just swoop in and start building on top of it. I'm
Yeah.
quite curious on what it is going to be for the high speed side of things.
Y- yeah. That's maybe a good way. That's maybe a good way to put it, is that there is nothing sort of like the AMM primitive or the structure was kind of an unlock that then propagated in this almost like mimetic fashion. And I don't think clubs are that, because clubs are just implementing TradFi because you can. They'll be useful, but I don't think that it's not like a unique unlock in the same way. And I think the unique unlock will be something more like AMMs, where
Yeah,
you
like
just
it.
hit you find a new optimum for UX and the that's possible in that environment that then propagates very quickly.
Yeah, and also these things tend to obey Gauss' law and be dead dumb simple, and then it is the ecosystem on top of them that gets complicated. It is
Yeah.
complex.
Yeah. Well, Uniswap is not simple anymore, but it used to be.
It does precisely what I mean. You start the Gauss law, basically, Gauss law, right? Basically, a system that is designed to be complex cannot and will never work. A system that is complex, that is found to work, will be found to have evolved from a simpler system that also works. So, like,
Yeah.
if you
Evolutionary
come up with,
algorithms.
yeah, if you come up with Uniswap v3, let's say, out of the gate, without having tried Uniswap, the first Uniswap, who knows what sort of weird ass exploits and complexity issues you're gonna run into, just because you don't have it's something new and you don't have the full mental model for the whole thing yet. You need
And
to complexify your mental model as you go.
neither does the audience, by the way. So if you gave them
Yeah.
Uniswap v4 today, they wouldn't know what to do with it. But Uniswap v1 was pure simplicity and worked well enough. It's only
Okay.
like the only problem with Uniswap v1 is that it was terrible, but that's why we got the roadmap to where we are.
Hey
Like,
man, you've heard the
but
line
it
of
but
if
it
your
hit
first version is not
UX.
embarrassing enough, you launched too late.
Yeah, and it hit UX. Perfect
Yeah.
UX for that moment. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm really curious. You know, this extends to what we were talking about. I think a few sessions ago, Filecoin subnets and all this stuff. Like there are a lot of like maybe not every new feature or every new step down in price and cost like unlocks something, but it does feel like we're getting to a point where there's like a lot of unlocks that are happening at the same time. And that's always like a very exciting time to be alive personally, is just to see like what people come up with. And I kind of really miss that feeling, that sort of like before the last cycle where you would like read a paper and just be like, holy shit. Like they're usually DeFi stuff back then, but it was just like people trying all kinds of wacky shit. They're just like, oh my God. So there's like this curve and like, and trying to understand what the hell's going on. On this topic as a last thing, one thing I want to quickly chat about is we built a simple internet computer application as a sort of like test just to see how things are going. So we have a client who was considering doing something on
Okay.
ICP. It's quite impressive. It took us all of like 2 hours to get a simple web app up and running.
Oh my goodness, what were you expecting? What were you trying to build?
Just a website with some like graphs and stuff. But you can do it with like React and JavaScript. You just pull existing libraries. You can do HTTP calls out. You can like pull from your own database. Like it's all incredibly simple. It's Web 2 programming on a kind of blockchain.
Oh. Would the database also being deployed to ICP as well, or?
Well, in this case, it wasn't, but it could be. So I think the ICP canisters currently have a memory limit of like, or wait, store. They have a memory limit of I think 32 because it's WASM, and then you can have they're going to have 64, and then you can have any number of canisters. So like if you can do whatever you need to do in that kind of environment, then you can. They don't
Okay,
have like explicit storage though.
the devil's in the details. So I'm curious. Like I said, web app is very generic, right? You could just have a static web app deployed to Arweave that makes a whole bunch of Ajax calls to something that's actually running on AWS. So I'm curious how much processing was actually happening on the canister itself. Like, did you actually have even some
in
rudimentary backend there? Like, what was the deal?
in this case not, but like but you can, like it's very simple. You can, I don't know, like can you deploy a web app to Arweave and just go to a URL and see it?
The Sure, why not? I mean, again, depends on what your definition of web app is. You could deploy either a static app where all the processing happens elsewhere. That would be the trivial implementation, or write something that is just making Ajax calls to a web server that's running somewhere else. Or you could just use I can't recall what they call it now, but basically just write the whole on the TOEFL JavaScript framework that they have going. Which is why I'm curious on if you deployed a Node backend, so it's even if a rudimentary one, which is something that you couldn't necessarily do, or you couldn't do that with, right? That's a completely different
You
programming model.
you can do that in a canister,
Sure, but did
but
you guys?
we did not in this case, no, because we were just trying it out. But that
Okay.
that will be something that we probably do in the next phase. It doesn't need to be Node. It could also be Rust or something else, depending on what you want to do. The server side stuff isn't like trickier a little bit in the sense that it's not just like copy paste, but you can do it. So I'm mainly saying that I think that like as an experience, both for the end user and the developer for doing at least simple things, is pretty unparalleled right now.
Nice.
Like if you
I
want to
like.
do that on Arweave, let me know where I can do that with zero prior knowledge within 2 hours.
I mean, again, depends on exactly what you want to do. As I mentioned, if you would want to upload a static app, that's probably relatively easy. If if you want to build any sort of backend, then that's going to be learn a new thing kind of
But
territory.
even static app.
I'm gonna look it up. I haven't looked into Arweave in a while, so but when I last did, there were all sorts of app bundlers and stuff going on, and so the static app side of things was straightforward. But again, just spitting out HTML and JavaScript to any sort of hosting mechanism is never the most difficult part about building these things.
Yeah. No, I'm sure there are like other ways of doing this, but I thought that was just generally impressive. And Arweave may have that. I need to look into them. I've never seen apps on Arweave that looked like Web 2 apps and felt like Web 2 apps, but I haven't used Arweave apps that much.
I think they're I mean, this it was kind of janky at first, but one of the first because UX. But one of the first showcases that I recall seeing on that side was I think it was called Weave Mail or something like that. It was like basically
I
their
tried that,
their
yeah.
Gmail. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing to me is at the point that you can actually run, as you mentioned, like a backend written on Rust on a more of an internet based thing. And this is mostly the same backend that you would be deploying to Fly or to Aeolius or anywhere else, then it gets interesting.
Yeah. That's kind of what I mean. And you can write it in whatever you're comfortable with because it wasm, etc. Like I think that's impressive. The fact that there's no storage or like not more storage means that you can't do like anything you want, but that's potentially something that Filecoin is now answering to some degree. And it would be really interesting to try to figure out, and probably we will be trying to figure out how to basically connect a sort of ICP application with Filecoin. And I don't know how this is possible, but theoretically a Filecoin subnet can be just one node. So like maybe you could just implement a Filecoin like the basically like implement the Filecoin IPC agent, which is the thing that communicates with the IPC protocol in Filecoin. Maybe you just implement that in a canister, and maybe that's enough, like a single node network as a subnet. I don't know.
Right. Looking forward to hearing your results reports.
I have no doubt that everything will not work at all. Like what happens, so I have this other thing. What happens almost every time when you try to build something real on top of any blockchain system is you like run headfirst into a whole variety of issues that are related to the fact that the system was actually built not for a user but in isolation.
Yeah.
and then and then the only solution to your problem is to build your own layer one. But I think this is an actual problem of many of the systems we have today, is that they were not designed for a specific use case because we didn't have a use case. We built the layer one first and then figured out the use cases after. And for every use case, you can relatively easily imagine a better architecture for the underlying system.
Again, another topic in which you're not
No
going to hear a lot
pushback.
of arguments from me. But you also do risk the fact that if you build something that is extremely specialized, you end up like being known as the DeFi chain, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the only thing that you're optimized for. And then it becomes really hard doing anything that's not a club. So it's
Yeah. So I mean, this is the thing, right? And like specialized chains are probably going to be the way that things go once things are very mature. I don't think we're there yet, but I don't think we're that far either. Like
Mm,
like Solana is kind of a DeFi chain, like
Solana
like a
has
financial
become,
chain. Let's say that.
yeah, it has become because of the high velocity, because it has to be high velocity, and Solana
But
lends
that's what
itself up
but
to
that's
that,
what they
right?
designed it for.
Sure. But
Yeah.
my point is that it doesn't need to just be that. It's just that DeFi is a well understood construct that it can act as a good showcase for what's going on in here. So
Yeah, but the one sort of impact of that sort of design decision to go for maximum velocity with the idea of like a globally synchronized state of financial information is that it's poor at handling anything which requires more information than like a small financial transaction, which is fine. But I was pointing this out more as like Solana might be already one of the sort of early examples of something like specialization. I think we'll get a lot more of those as the industry matures more.
maybe I could still see, for instance, Solana as very much of something that we were talking about gaming earlier. And I think gaming is a great fit precisely because you're likely going to be dealing with a lot of small data updates to things. So I
True.
think that's going to be it's going to be something where it works as well, but we'll see.
But Solana does have very constrained storage.
But yes,
So, like, while gaming is a good use case for like a lot of queries, a lot of small queries, a lot of small updates, like high velocity of read write, it usually also encompasses quite a lot of storage.
which reminds me,
But you
by the
don't need to
way,
use a blockchain for that if you don't want to.
and we can almost treat this as a preview of coming attractions. Something that I wanted to propose that we should do is have a discussion like a more in-depth discussion of Solana versus Aptos versus Sui. I hadn't really done too much research on the Sui side of things until recently. And one of the things that I read in passing, since you mentioned storage, is that it might lend itself better for higher storage volume as well, as opposed to Solana or Aptos. So I'm thinking that given that we keep coming back to the Solana well, this might be an interesting compare and contrast for like a single focus episode. And
But storage is tricky. So I everyone is going to try to plug in their own storage. In fact, we're working on one option for one network ecosystem, but it might it might be better as the core, like the Filecoin, the Arweave model,
yeah,
because it's such a complex thing. Like sort of like the basic blockchain stuff is very well understood. The storage part is not, and so the direction there is like. So my point here is that maybe everyone just becomes a Filecoin subnet. I don't know, but like if you want movie and you want storage, wouldn't it make more sense to just implement MovieM as a Filecoin subnet with Narwhal Bullshark consensus? Like, you know?
that seems to be working on under the assumption that the same people who can. Well, first of all, the Sui people already have an interest in getting, say, storage working on Sui. The Solana people have an interest in getting storage working on Solana. And that seems to be working on the assumption that the people who actually want to use this thing are capable of building a network so that they can use the thing, which they're usually not, right? If I want to build a game, I'm going to go to the network that gives me the best possible combination, which might be a
Sure.
Falcon subnet or not.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that the game developer would do it, but like someone could just do that, and that would possibly be if you need storage, that might possibly be a better way. And here again, the problem with Arweave we always have with every we've talked about before is that like none of this stuff is gonna work with
Yeah.
Arweave.
Okay, this is going to be a longer discussion, but I do think that we should use this tree as a comparison point to figure out
Yeah.
basically kind of like a path forward, like this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So until next time, when we may or we may not dig into fast chain Trinity.
Perfectly
Uh,
possible we'll forget about it in the next 10 minutes.
yeah, or something else happens by the next time we record, and then we just drop it. Yeah,
Yeah, cool. Let's wrap it up.
great. Thank you, everyone, for listening. All of you, and see you next time.